post George Floyd, from institutional racism to DEI, where are we now? So, brothers, again, thank you for being a part of this conversation. So I'm going to, hopefully I'll set the table properly. What I'd like to do is for uh, Brother Bryant and Brother Akbar to just kind of take us through a conversation on, okay, we knew about George Floyd, the conversation, the community, the nation, the world was shocked to see someone murdered in front of their eyes. And real conversation was being had about this thing called racism and understanding that it was structural and institutional. We started getting deep into it. As we mentioned in our last conversation, you had corporations forming the, I'll say, steering committees to look at how the role that they played. You had institutions. This led to the development of the highlighting of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You had the Catholic Church, unprompted pretty much, offering $100 million and the role that they played in the slave trade. But I want to turn over to you because you brothers, this is the work that you do. Mm-hmm. Walk us through your perspective on the discussion of institutional racism to DEI to where we are now, and kind of set the table on where we need to go from here, please.
Brother Akbar, I'll let you go first. I know you said you got to make a transition, so.
Yes. Well, first I will say that diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice has been around pretty much since the founding of this country. So the whole electoral college, the whole idea that you have the Congress, you have a bicameral Congress with the Senate and the House of Representatives, is the idea in practice of equity. But people don't think of it that way. It's ensuring that people have you are able to amplify the voices of those who are in more marginalized places. So if you think about it, you have 2 senators for every state, and that includes Connecticut, that includes Maine, that includes Nebraska, South Dakota, all places that don't have large populations, but they have the same number of representatives in the Senate. Whereas the House of Representatives, you have representatives portioned by population. So the idea and practice of how you think about equity has been around for a long time. However, when you layer on top, when you think about intersections, when you layer on top race, when you layer on top gender, and you give it a word, that's when there's a rub. That's when there's a challenge. So, when we talk about where are we going from now, I have to just briefly talk about the decision to limit affirmative action at higher education. That ruling from the Supreme Court last June really has amplified the negative talk and even have encouraged certain states and universities and schools to get rid of their DEI departments because they're scared that DEI has now been ruled to be unconstitutional, and that is not what the Supreme Court said. And it limited only to higher education admissions decisions, which is a very limited scope of how you can apply that. And so where is it going now? I think what I'm seeing is some districts and organizations and even municipalities are doing 2 things. They're either ramping up their support by hiring more people and actually giving them the authority to do the job, which has been part of the challenge. Is sometimes you hire a person, but you don't have them the authority to do the job. They're a low-level person. They're not reporting directly to the chief executive, and so they don't have any decision-making power, or ability to truly audit another vice president or another executive work because they are a low-level staff. And so where is it going now is you're seeing a ramping up of more staff members, or on the complete opposite end, they're eliminating their internal infrastructure and going to external support. And there's challenges to that, as I'm sure you can imagine. And there's also challenges to the ramp up if it's not done well. And there's, again, if that authority isn't there, you can have a $1 million budget, but if the people tasked with doing that work doesn't have the authority to really make any meaningful change, then the work really doesn't move forward. And so it's a check the box type of thing. And that's what we need to move away from. So I know Brother Smith will enlighten us with some additional layers to this work as we begin this conversation. I'm going to switch devices, but I'll be listening the entire time.
All right. Well, thank you, my dear brother. Now, I don't know, you have the word doctor in front of your name, so I don't know if I can follow what you just said and do a better job or add any more to the conversation, but I will try.
You can. I promise you.
You promise? All right. Well, it's interesting that you went all the way back to sort of the founding of the nation to talk about DEI, particularly the equity piece, because I want to piggyback off of that and talk about the diversity piece. This nation could not have been founded and grown the way it went if the founders didn't have an understanding of diversity, because they had to create a system that identified who had worth and who didn't have worth. And they did that from its origin. When they came, the natives, the value of the first indigenous people that they encountered was not high. And so they had to put a hierarchy together, which in essence, it's funny that they don't want DEI now when they are the people who created DEI. And so when you think about, they created a structure that said, if you were white and European from certain countries, a landowner and male, you were then entitled to certain benefits and privileges. And if you fit other categories of people outside of that, you were different, and therefore your privileges were handed out according to whatever this system is of diversity that they create. Now, they didn't call it diversity, but they had everything in it from chattel slavery to a whole bunch of other stuff. So that piece and framing the conversation that way, I think is something that the average DEI professional does not do. And the average class or instructor or college or university course on DEI does not frame it that way either. And that is where there's a disservice. That's why there's a disconnect, because the average citizen believes that this is a conversation that we just started having post George Floyd's murder. And so when people are coming into this thinking this is something nuanced, it's very new, and we only had to have this because a Black man got killed, it's easier for them to devalue it and want to see it done away with, because in their mind, they've had a lifetime without this and everything was fine. And so framing it properly with the founding of this nation is one of the best methods, I think, of even beginning to have the conversation. Because if you don't frame it correctly, you won't ask the right questions. And if you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. So this is a great start. I didn't know the brother was going to go back that far, but I'm glad that he did, because it makes the conversation, I think, easier, but also deeper.
Okay.